Kieran adjusted the hem of his jacket as he approached the medical center, the subtle hum of the building's energy fields making the hairs on his arms stand on end. It was his final appointment before onboarding the Orion, a deep space cargo and research vessel set to launch in 3 weeks. Every prospective crew member had to pass a rigorous series of medical exams, the last of which was handled by a coalition of interstellar medics alien specialists brought in to assess the readiness of diverse species. For Kieran, the past few weeks had been a whirlwind of psych evaluations, aptitude tests, and physical fitness checks. None of it had fazed him. If anything, he had breezed through it all, his confidence in his abilities unshaken. But today felt different. There was something unsettling about being scrutinized by non-human doctors, even if they were some of the most respected professionals in the galaxy. Next, a melodic voice called from the reception area. The speaker was tall and willowy, with skin that shimmered faintly like polished obsidian. Her bright yellow eyes fixed on him as he stepped forward. Kieran Latham. "That's me," he said, flashing a smile. The alien woman tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Follow me," she said, turning sharply and leading him down a corridor that pulsed with bioluminescent lighting. The examination room was starkly sterile, though the equipment inside looked nothing like what Kieran had seen in human hospitals. Hovering orbs blinked and whirred as he entered, and a translucent table rippled like liquid glass when he placed his hand on it. 3 doctors waited for him, a stout, blue-scaled male with webbed hands, a slender individual with bark-like skin and moss sprouting from their shoulders, and a diminutive figure whose face was obscured by a mask of shimmering light. "Please take a seat," said the blue-scaled doctor, gesturing toward the undulating table. Kieran hesitated, then sat, marveling as the surface molded to the contours of his body. "So, what's the plan here? Blood samples, scans, that kind of thing." "All of that and more," replied the moss-covered doctor, their voice calm and resonant. "We will conduct a full genomic analysis. It is standard procedure for all interspecies crews." Kieran nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what a full genomic analysis entailed. Still, he trusted the process. Humans had been collaborating with alien species for decades, and the medics had earned a reputation for their expertise. The examination began with a flurry of activity. The hovering orbs emitted soft beams of light that scanned him from head to toe, while the mossy doctor collected a blood sample using a needle that felt oddly warm against his skin. The blue-scaled medic took hair and skin samples, storing them in crystalline vials that glowed faintly. "You've got a clean bill of health," the bark-like doctor said after reviewing his initial vitals. "Remarkably so, in fact. Your immune system is exceptionally robust." Kieran grinned. "Good genes, I guess." The light-masked doctor, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Their voice was high and lilting, with an odd echo that made Kieran's head buzz. "We will need to sequence your genome thoroughly. It may take some time." "Go for it," Kieran said with a shrug. "I've got nowhere to be." The doctors exchanged a glance that Kieran couldn't interpret. Then, without another word, they left the room, leaving him alone with the strange orbs that continued to hover nearby. He leaned back on the liquid-like table, letting his thoughts wander. It was strange how routine this all felt. A few decades ago, the idea of humans working alongside alien species had seemed like pure science fiction. Now here he was, casually undergoing tests conducted by beings from entirely different worlds. The door hissed open, and the blue-scaled doctor returned. He looked tense, though Kieran couldn't be sure. Aliens didn't always display emotions the way humans did. "Is everything okay?" Kieran asked, sitting up slightly. Yes, the doctor said quickly. "However, we have detected some anomalies in your DNA. Nothing concerning, but we would like to cross-reference your genetic profile with your family's." Kieran frowned. "What kind of anomalies?" "Uncommon sequences," the doctor replied, avoiding specifics. "They are not harmful, but they are intriguing. Do you have biological parents we could contact for samples?" "Sure," Kieran said, though he felt a flicker of unease. "My parents live on Earth. I can give you their contact information." The doctor inclined his head. "Excellent. We will reach out to them immediately." Kieran left the medical center with a nagging sense of unease. The rest of his day passed in a blur, and by the time he returned to his small apartment, he was restless. Something about the doctor's reactions had unsettled him. What could they have found in his DNA that required cross-referencing with his parents? The following morning, his mother called. "Kieran, honey, some alien doctors reached out to us. They wanted blood samples. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom. It's just part of the pre-flight screening. Nothing to worry about." "Are you sure?" They sounded very serious. I'm sure Kieran lied, not wanting to alarm her. "Just cooperate with them, okay?" Of course. But they asked a lot of questions about your early childhood. It felt strange. Kieran's stomach twisted. Like what? "They asked if we had a complete medical history for you, and if there was any chance you were adopted." Adopted? Kieran laughed, though it came out hollow. Why would they think that? "I don't know," his mother said, her voice tinged with confusion. "But your father and I told them the truth. We don't know much about your birth parents." Kieran froze. "What are you talking about?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Kieran, we've always meant to tell you, but the time never felt right. You were adopted. We don't know where you came from. You were left at a hospital as a baby." His mind reeled. "You're kidding." "I'm not," his mother said quietly. "We didn't want you to feel different. You're our son, no matter what." Kieran sat down heavily, his thoughts racing. "Does this have something to do with what the doctors found?" "I don't know," she admitted. But they were very insistent. After hanging up, Kieran stared blankly at the wall. Adopted? His entire identity felt suddenly fragile. And what could be in his DNA that would lead to such a revelation? His heart pounded as he realized he needed answers fast. Kieran barely slept that night. His mind spun through memories that now felt like they belonged to someone else. Adopted. He had lived his whole life thinking he was the biological son of Richard and Elaine Latham, but in reality he had no idea where he came from. And the doctors had known something was off before even speaking to his parents. That meant whatever they had found in his DNA had nothing to do with medical records or ancestry. It was something deeper, something undeniable. By morning, he had made peace with one thing: he needed to confront the doctors directly. He arrived at the medical center earlier than scheduled, half expecting to be turned away, but the moment he stepped inside, the blue-scaled doctor from yesterday, Dr. Vailon, was already waiting for him. "We were about to call you," Vailon said, his tone unreadable. "Please come with me." Kieran followed without a word, his pulse hammering in his ears. This time they led him to a different room, one with no hovering scanners, no medical tables, just a sleek metal desk and a set of chairs. It felt less like a medical consultation and more like an interrogation. Two additional figures were waiting inside. One was the moss-covered doctor from before, but the other was someone new, a tall, imposing alien with sharp ridges along the sides of their face, wearing the insignia of the Galactic Medical Authority. Kieran took a seat. "So are you going to tell me what's going on, or are we just going to sit here in awkward silence?" Vailon hesitated, then pulled up a holo display filled with genetic markers and complex data streams. "Kieran, we compared your DNA to your adoptive parents. As expected, there was no match. But that wasn't the problem." Kieran frowned. Then what was? The tall alien who had yet to introduce himself spoke for the first time. "Your DNA is not fully human." Silence stretched between them. Kieran let out a short laugh. "Come on. That's ridiculous." "We verified the results multiple times," Vailon said. "Your genome contains sequences that match known patterns from an extraterrestrial species. Specifically, our species." Kieran's stomach twisted. "What?" The moss-covered doctor leaned forward. "To be clear, you are not a hybrid in the traditional sense. Your human DNA is dominant. But within you, embedded in the very fabric of your genetic structure, there are sequences that are unmistakably Rylan." Kieran shook his head. "Rylan?" Vailon gestured to himself. "My species. We have no record of human Rylan genetic compatibility. It should not be biologically possible." Kieran exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "That's impossible. If that were true," then he stopped, realization slamming into him. If that were true, he said slowly, it would mean I wasn't just abandoned. It would mean I was put on Earth. The room remained eerily quiet. Valon exchanged a glance with the tall official. We need more information, he admitted. Your adoptive parents did not know the truth, which means whoever left you at that hospital did not intend for you to grow up aware of your origins. Kieran clenched his fists. Then how do we find out who did this? The tall official tapped on his holopad. We're already looking into it. But you may be the only living proof that such a hybrid is possible. That makes you significant. Kieran hated the way he said that, like he was an object, a specimen, not a person. So what happens now, he asked, forcing himself to sound steady. The official studied him. You still wish to join the Orion, correct? Kieran blinked. Yeah, of course. Then we move forward. Your genetic nature does not disqualify you from service. Something about the way he phrased it made Kieran uneasy. Valon leaned forward. We will continue running deeper analyses. If you allow it, we would also like to conduct neurological and physiological tests, non-invasive, but thorough. We need to understand how your hybrid nature manifests, if at all. Kieran hesitated. It wasn't just curiosity driving them, it was the need for control, for certainty. The Galactic Medical Authority wouldn't let this discovery fade into obscurity. But he needed answers, too. Fine, he said. Run your tests. The official stood. Good. We will be in touch soon. The next week passed in a haze of examinations. They tested his reflexes, his cognitive processing, his pain tolerance. He was scanned in ways he didn't even know were possible. And the more they tested, the more unsettling the results became. His immune system was far stronger than an average human's, nearly impervious to diseases. His healing rate was slightly accelerated, though not dramatically so. His oxygen efficiency was exceptional, almost on par with trained athletes, despite never having formally trained. And then there were the neurological scans. They showed activity in regions of the brain that, in humans, were largely dormant. The Ryland doctors seemed particularly interested in those results, though they refused to say why. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Valon met with him again. We have reason to believe your Ryland DNA is not just passive inheritance, he said carefully. It is active in ways we cannot yet fully explain. Kieran exhaled. Meaning you are not just a genetic anomaly, Valon said. You are something entirely new. Kieran barely heard the words being spoken to him. His mind was locked onto one thing. Someone had made him this way. Not chance. Not a freak accident of genetics. Deliberate. Intentional. He sat stiffly in the secure lab, the holo display still projecting swirling genetic data above the table. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the medical center's energy fields. Across from him, Dr. Valon and the Galactic Medical Authority official watched him carefully, their unreadable alien expressions making his skin crawl. The official spoke first. Kieran, we need to find out who did this to you. Kieran let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, no kidding. Valon tapped the holo interface, shifting the projection to show a complex genetic map. Your Ryland DNA is too structured to be natural. There are markers in your genome that indicate deliberate sequencing, the kind of precise work that only advanced bioengineering could accomplish. Kieran stared at the glowing strands of code. So you're saying I was designed? Not necessarily from birth, Valon said, but at some point in your early development, your DNA was altered, possibly even before you were born. The weight of it hit Kieran like a blow to the chest. He had spent the last few days grappling with the idea that he was part Ryland, but now, the revelation twisted into something even more unsettling. Someone had chosen this for him. And that meant someone had been watching him. He took a slow breath. If I was modified, then there has to be a record somewhere. You don't just rewrite someone's DNA without leaving traces. The galactic official nodded. Exactly. We've begun searching medical archives for unusual genetic modifications on Earth, but it would help if you provided details about your early life, where you were found, any medical treatments you had as a child. Kieran hesitated. I don't know much. My adoptive parents said I was left at a hospital as a newborn. No records of who left me. The official's gaze darkened. That complicates things. No name. No history. But there's another way to trace this, Vailon said, adjusting the display again. If we can analyze the specific genetic patterns in your Ryland DNA, we might be able to determine who contributed to your genome. Every living being carries genetic markers that can be traced to family lines. If we find a match in Ryland databases, we may identify who or what was responsible for your creation. Kieran's stomach twisted. You want to run a paternity test? In a manner of speaking, Vailon said. The galactic official folded his hands. If a Ryland individual or organization was involved in your genetic engineering, there may be an active effort to hide it. You should prepare yourself for resistance. Kieran exhaled slowly. The pieces were starting to fit together in an eerie, unsettling way. He had been abandoned on Earth. No records of his biological parents. DNA that had been modified before birth. And now, the possibility that a living Ryland, his genetic origin, was out there with answers. And maybe they didn't want to be found. His grip tightened on the edge of the table. Run the test. Vailon gave a small nod and activated the sequencing process. The glowing strands of genetic data flickered, breaking apart and rearranging as the system began cross-referencing known Ryland DNA records. Seconds stretched into minutes. Kieran barely breathed. Then, the display flickered and a result appeared. Vailon stiffened. The official's expression darkened. Kieran's pulse pounded. What? What is it? The room was dead silent. Then Vailon turned to him, his voice quieter than before. Kieran, we found a match. The room felt too small. Kieran's breath came slower, heavier, as he stared at the holo display. The glowing genetic data had reorganized itself into something terrifyingly simple. A match. A name. Vailon and the galactic official were silent, their expressions unreadable. The two other Ryland medics stood rigidly behind them, their glowing yellow eyes locked onto the screen with what Kieran could only describe as shock. Finally, Kieran found his voice. Who? Vailon hesitated, then exhaled. Kieran, your genetic sequence matches with a direct descendant of Zorvath Alindran. Kieran frowned. Who? The official's voice was quiet. One of the highest-ranking figures in the Ryland High Council. Kieran's stomach twisted. I have Ryland royalty in my DNA. Not royalty, Vailon corrected, but powerful. Zorvath Alindran is one of the leading figures in Ryland's scientific development. He oversees high-level projects, genetic research, planetary adaptation, neural enhancement. Kieran's mouth felt dry. So you're saying this guy made me? The official's gaze was steady. It's likely he was involved. Whether he acted alone or as part of a larger experiment remains unclear. Kieran's mind reeled. This was no accident, no random event. He had been placed on Earth. Someone had carefully rewritten his DNA, left him where no one would look for him, and let him grow up as human. But why? He gritted his teeth. Where's Zorvath now? The official tapped at the holo display. He's currently stationed on Virus Prime, a Ryland research colony. Then I want to talk to him, Kieran said. The room fell into silence. Vailon looked uneasy. That may not be wise. I don't care, Kieran snapped. I need answers. If this guy had a hand in making me, then he knows why I was abandoned. He knows why I exist. The official studied him. And if he refuses to speak with you? Kieran's jaw tightened. Then he has something to hide. The official considered this for a moment, then turned to Vailon. Arrange a direct request for an audience with Zorvath Alindran. We'll see how he responds. Vailon hesitated, then nodded. Understood. Kieran exhaled. His whole life had been a question without an answer. But now, for the first time, he was on the edge of the truth. And he wasn't leaving without it. The Ryland research facility on Virus Prime was unlike anything Kieran had ever seen. Sleek, towering structures loomed over the landscape, their crystalline surfaces pulsing with faint blue light. The entire colony seemed to hum with unseen energy, the very air charged with an almost electric sensation. Kieran was escorted through winding corridors, his every step flanked by Ryland guards. The gravity here was slightly lighter than Earth's, making his movements feel unnervingly weightless. Finally, they stopped in front of a massive chamber. One of the guards turned to him. "Zorvath Alindrin will see you now." Kieran squared his shoulders and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, but at the center, standing before an array of holographic projections, was the man, if man was even the right word, who had rewritten Kieran's existence. Zorvath Alindrin was tall, even by Ryland standards. His elongated features were sharp, refined, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the low light. His robes were sleek, adorned with insignias Kieran didn't recognize, but one thing was certain: this was a being of power. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zorvath tilted his head slightly. "You found me sooner than I expected." Kieran clenched his fists. "So you knew this would happen?" Zorvath exhaled softly. "I suspected." Kieran's heart pounded. "Why? Why did you do this to me?" Zorvath studied him for a long moment, then gestured to the holoscreen. Data flickered to life, genetic models spinning in the air, complex and mesmerizing. "You are the product of an experiment," Zorvath said, his voice measured, "one that had to be hidden." Kieran's pulse quickened. "Hidden from who?" "Everyone." Zorvath turned to face him fully. "The Rylan are an ancient species. We have strict genetic policies, rules that forbid direct interference with developing civilizations. But some of us believe that human evolution held potential." Kieran's stomach twisted. "You experimented on my species." "No," Zorvath corrected. "We observed. And what we saw fascinated us. Your species is unpredictable, resilient, adaptable in ways we do not fully understand." Kieran scowled. "So what? You wanted to make a half-Rylan, half-human test subject?" Zorvath's expression didn't change. "We wanted to see if it was possible, and you are proof that it was." Kieran's breath hitched. "But then why abandon me?" For the first time, Zorvath hesitated. Then he spoke, his voice quieter. "Because it was a mistake." Kieran froze. Zorvath's golden eyes flickered with something unreadable. "The High Council discovered what we had done. The experiment was deemed too dangerous. There were fears that if you grew up among us, you would be seen as an abomination, a violation of natural law." Kieran's fists clenched. "So you just dumped me on Earth and walked away?" Zorvath's gaze was steady. "It was the only way to keep you safe." A sharp laugh escaped Kieran. "Safe? You abandoned me. You erased my past. You let me grow up thinking I was human, when all along, I was." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You didn't save me. You just got rid of your mistake." Zorvath studied him carefully. "And yet you survived. Thrived. You were never meant to exist, Kieran, and yet here you are, standing before me." Kieran's hands shook, anger boiling beneath his skin. "I didn't ask for this." "No," Zorvath agreed. "But the fact remains you are the first." Silence filled the chamber. Kieran's mind swirled with everything he had learned. He had been a secret, a hidden experiment buried on Earth to avoid political consequences. But now, there was no hiding anymore. Zorvath took a step closer, the glow of the holoscreens casting sharp shadows across his face. "You were not supposed to be found, Kieran. Not by us. Not by anyone." Kieran scoffed. "Well, that plan worked out great." Zorvath's expression remained unreadable. "Do you think this is a victory? That knowing the truth changes your place in the universe?" Kieran's jaw tightened. "It changes everything." A flicker of something regret passed over Zorvath's features. "No, it only confirms what we already knew, that you are an anomaly, an unresolved variable." Kieran stepped forward, closing the space between them. "No, I'm your unfinished experiment, and I want to know what happens next." Zorvath studied him for a long moment before he spoke. That is not for me to decide. Kieran narrowed his eyes. Then who? Zorvath turned, activating a new holoscreen. It displayed something far more unsettling than genetic code. A list of names. Dozens. Rylan officials. Military leaders. Scientists. Kieran's breath hitched as he realized what he was looking at. They know about me, he muttered. They do now, Zorvath confirmed. The moment your DNA was sequenced in the official records, the signal went out. You are no longer a secret. Kieran felt his pulse hammering in his skull. And what exactly do they plan to do with me? Zorvath finally looked away. Some will want to study you. Some will want to hide you, his golden eyes darkened. And some will want to erase you. Kieran's stomach turned cold. So that's it, he asked. You tell me the truth, and now I'm a target. Zorvath exhaled slowly. I told you because you deserve to know. But now that you do, you must decide, will you run? Or will you become something greater? Kieran clenched his fists. He had spent his whole life not knowing where he belonged, not knowing who he was. But now the whole galaxy knew his name. And he wasn't about to disappear. He met Zorvath's gaze unwavering. I don't run. Zorvath gave a slow nod, something almost like approval flickering in his expression. Then you should prepare yourself. The screen behind him shifted again, this time to a list of outbound ships. Kieran understood the message instantly. You're letting me go, he said. I'm giving you a head start, Zorvath corrected. Use it wisely. Kieran turned toward the exit, his mind already racing ahead. He had spent his life thinking he was just another human, just another man trying to carve out a future in the stars. But he wasn't just a man. He was something else,